Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with himself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update. First part thereof for the 29th of June 2024. Let's get straight to where we normally start. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course. And you can find them in the description to the video found below where you're watching this screen. Okay. What has happened? 1,070 personnel lost. That's slightly lower than we have seen over the last week or so. 7 tanks, it's just below average there. Lower than yesterday's heavy tank losses, but we have seen a number of days recently where tank losses have been pretty minimal. 25 armoured personnel vehicles, that is above average by about 9, I think, something like that. And 57 artillery systems, about three times the daily average. So kind of a mixed bag there. No MLRS, multiple launch rocket systems, or anti-aircraft warfare systems. The anti-aircraft warfare system is something that you would want to see Ukraine attrit from Russia on a regular basis, but none there today. 54 vehicles and fuel tanks and 5 pieces of special equipment. Fairly high for the vehicles and fuel tanks, which is kind of what we expect these days on a daily basis. So yeah, a bit of a mixed bag. I think there are flashpoints along the front line. We've got northern Kharkiv area. We've got Terny and Torska to the west of Crimea. And then we've got obviously Chasiv Yar, Avdiivka, Krasnohorivka, Novomykhailivka, and even south of there. No huge activity, I think, along the southern front line or along Dnipro. And so, yeah, we might see the numbers drop a little depending on what the Russians do. I don't know whether they are going to be going for this really big offensive towards Borova halfway up that northeastern axis. If they do that, the numbers are obviously going to be a lot higher as they attack the Ukrainian defences there. But yeah, even on quieter days, they still lose significant amount of equipment, and particularly artillery systems. The Ukrainians, ever since May last year, have been intent on taking out as much Russian artillery as possible for sensible reasons, because that is a god of war and is what has traditionally caused most of the deaths and injuries for the Ukrainians. Of course, now that is swapped to drone activity on both sides, being the big killer or maimer of troops. And while artillery will be attrited, I wonder what each side has up their sleeves in terms of taking out drones. And you would have thought it's not about taking out the drones, it's about taking out the drone crews and drone stocks. I don't know if that's something that you can set up a plan to do in terms of, yeah, you could hit, for example, Shahed drones only get made in certain amount of places, right? And so if you're going to tackle how Shaheds are being used, then yep, you can shoot them down, but you also want to take out the storage facilities and then the production facilities, because there will only be a couple of places that those are either stored or manufactured. So the Ukraine has hit, I think, 2 out of 5 Shahed drone takeoff points. That will include taking out crews that do that, and then maybe some stockpiles of those. They've hit a warehouse that has a load of Shaheds, as well as Zala reconnaissance drones and Lancet loitering munitions, and as well trying to take out the manufacturing facility all the way back in Russia. So that's you can do that because it's a much smaller kind of process. But with FPV drones, where you're making 90,000 a month, so the Ukrainians are making 90,000 a month, and they come from people making it at home, people getting them from abroad, from so many different drone companies in Ukraine. It's almost too much to be able to hit. You can make a dent in that maybe, but these drones are being made en masse and imported en masse in so many different ways, and then finding their ways to the front line, whether it be in the back of an SUV, getting a bunch of drones from the talk that I just gave recently up in Andover area, and the drone fundraising they were doing. So they get consistent number of drones through all these much smaller ways to the front line, to different units. Units will get drones from all over the shop. I don't know how viable it is to have some kind of system whereby you are trying to stop that. It's almost like trying to stop troops using AK-47s. Like, how do you do that? You're never going to do that. They're just going to get AK-47s from all over the shop and use them on the front line. So so therefore it comes down to technology to stop FPV drones being utilized so much. It's about the countermeasures, and it's interesting on Andrew Perpetua's live stream last night. There's Erland on there who's been to the front lines or been to Ukraine and spoken to people about drones, and he seems to have quite a lot to talk about with regard to countermeasures and measures, countermeasures, so on and so forth. I want to interview him actually to see what his findings were, but he says there is a lot going on in this field, and in order to try and get one over the enemy, it's a technological race, I think, as much as anything, rather than finding out targets like it is with artillery systems and air defense systems. Like, we need to find where they use that and blow it up. With FPV drones, they just proliferate so much that it's going to have to be a different approach. Anyway, I digress. That's the list of losses for today. When we look at Andrew Perpetua's loss stats, it's yet again a day where, the Russians have lost more than the Ukrainians, but the Ukrainians have lost quite a lot. And it's not the ratio one would hope for. Here, instead of a 3-1, it's a 3-2. So we have 59 Russian losses and 40. So it's basically 60-40, 3-2. Now, if we look at the combat vehicles and equipment that was lost, we have 15, 18, 25. So 25 Russian combat vehicles to 11 combat vehicles for the Ukrainians. So it is better on the combat side of things. So in other words, quite a lot of the Ukrainian losses are in civilian vehicles and maybe electronic warfare and surveillance and comms and boats and stuff. So, and trucks. But actually, when you look at the combat assets, it's better. It's a better picture today than for the Ukrainians and for the Russians. Nonetheless, they are losing quite a bit of kit across all of the categories of the Ukrainians. Okay, some electronic warfare, surveillance and comms, boats. Then we get down to one tank, a number of infantry fighting vehicles, including 3 damaged Bradleys. So we are seeing Bradleys every day now on the loss lists, and that tells you something. We've got a Humvee for an APC and 2 Max Pro MRAPs there, abandoned and damaged. Those are Western vehicles, so quite a lot of Western kit on the loss list there for the Ukrainians. As I've said, we're going to expect that going forward. We've got an AHS Crab decoy there being damaged by a Lancet. But yes, civilian vehicles and trucks take out quite a few places on the list there. Then when we come to the Russian losses, no really high value equipment here at all. We've got a tractor, some artillery pieces, quite a lot of tanks, T-80s, T-72, and then a lot of unknown tanks as they get fundamentally disassembled. You don't always know what they are. We have a few infantry fighting vehicles. That's the lowest number I've seen for some time. And then quite a few APCs in relation. A lot of civilian vehicles, trucks and ATVs, some golf buggies there, Desert Cross 1000-3. So nothing hugely valuable for the Russians or indeed for the Ukrainians. Just it's a game of numbers here today. And although the Ukrainians have the advantage, they need, I think, a better advantage in that. And it probably shows, I'd imagine, that some of these are being lost in Chasiv Yar. Chasiv Yar is getting hammered, and the vehicles I've seen Max Pros driving around there, trying to get from A to B to do their resupplies or getting troops from here to there, and they are getting absolutely hammered by the Russians. Chasiv Yar, I think, is really difficult at the moment. But up in the northern Kharkiv area, the Ukrainians are probably going to be losing quite a bit of kit because they are on the attack, doing the counterattacks there, and that's where probably, complete speculations, quite a bit of their losses are coming from. And then, of course, the usual kind of trucks and civilian vehicles operating anywhere near the front line. Right, okay. Jane Kiev here says, in relation to a video posted by Albina Feller, within the inevitable reparation settlement requiring generations of Russians to pay for their global atrocities, there must be an agreement to remove all the Russian corpses from Ukrainian territory. We'll be finding this stuff for the next 100 years. Actually, this is a pretty good point. So this video, I want to... Oh, damn it. Why did it go back to... I didn't want to show that. Anyway, I'm trying to
Смотрите.
not show anything too inappropriate. There we go. There's a field. Right. Okay. Ukraine, summer 2024, June. The corpses have already decomposed. How can we identify them? By badge, by DNA? All our brothers died. When will they be buried? Says a Russian person filming this. Now, the Russian shows a large number of his destroyed comrades. I mean, it's a pretty horrific video. Lots of dead bodies. So again, this, you know, it feeds into the idea that the Russians are losing lots, but of course, Ukrainians will be losing as well. But he laments that the corpses are not taken away and they rot in the fields. Graphic content warning. And this video shows a large number of corpses, and they have a lot of them have properly decomposed. You think, how long have they been there? This, of course, is beneficial for the Russians economically. They don't and also socially. So if they get the corpses, well, okay, let's rewind to what happens if in the contact line area you lose troops and they get injured or they die. Like, you go and get those injured comrades or those dead bodies, but in doing that you're putting your own people at risk, and so therefore it can be quite dangerous to do that, and then you end up losing more people. So there is a prima facie good reason, if you see what I mean, like inverted commas, good reason not to initially get injured and dead. That sounds horrible, but it is a risk, and you can end up getting into worse and worse. It just increases as more people go to the place to get the injured, then they get injured, and then you have to send more people in, and in the end, you just lost everyone because you've been trying to do the right thing, if you like, of getting your injured people out the contact line. So, and it can take, like, to get one injured person out, you sometimes need 4 people to lift a stretcher, and so it is labor intensive, if you like. So there's your first issue, and that's the same for both sides, any side operating in war. But then, once that area has become not on the contact line, you're moving forward, then what are you doing to get those now dead bodies? Now, the Russians have an incentive not to pick up dead bodies, because they then have to admit that those people are dead. So they have to go back to their families and say, your son is dead. And then that family gets upset and they say, why the hell are we in this war? And then they moan on social media and they moan to the other family members. I mean, it might be they get super patriotic and say, yeah, my son died a hero. But there will be a percentage of people who will be not in a good place over this. So by accepting, but you are just putting off and kicking this problem into the long weeds. But initially, it's like, right, we don't want to admit that we've had as many dead people as we've got, so leave them on the field and we'll just say they're missing. But then on top of that, you've got an economic incentive, which is, if we do admit that they're dead and we do get their bodies back, then we have to pay their families compensation. So again, it is kicking to the long weeds still, but for right now, we don't want public sentiment to be negative, and we don't want to pay more money out to these families, because we ain't got much money, and all that money is being applied into committing to the to building equipment, to recruiting, to paying our soldiers. The more money we have to pay to dead soldiers' families, then that's a bit of a nightmare. And the end result is you get fields of corpses, and these are now disintegrating to the point where you can't tell who they are. Do they have dog tags? Is it going to be a case of having to do DNA sampling of all of these dead bodies? What's going on there? Incredible. Anyway, so I was talking about Russian tank losses and how they've gone up and down and up and down. And some days have been 0, and then there's a day of 20, and then there's a day today of like 8, and then 3, and then 0. And then what's going on there? I think just in general, we are seeing fewer tanks lost, because I think we're seeing fewer tanks being used, because I think the Russians have got fewer tanks to use. So Robert here says, I share your puzzlement with regard to Russian tank losses, JP, but something has definitely changed since mid-month. In the first half of June, actually 18 days up to June the 15th, Russian daily tank losses were 14.6 per day, with little daily variation. Since mid-month, the average daily losses have fallen by a third to 9.3 per day, with highly erratic daily figures. When taken in combination with increased Russian use of civilian recreational vehicles in the logistics chain and in the assault units, it's difficult to avoid the conclusion alluded to by Andrew that we are witnessing the steady demechanization of the Russian army. And this is what I've been saying, that this is telling us something. It has to be. And although someone like Jack Watling can say, yeah, they can continue doing this till 2025, late 2025 into 2026, I think they can't continue doing this. And the evidence is what we are seeing on a daily basis when we're tracking the numbers. And okay, you can call into question how accurate they may or may not be. But even if you take 15% off those numbers, you still have that same trend, right? If you're going to be consistent with how, they're likely to be consistently wrong if they're going to be wrong at all, rather than just randomly wrong. So if they're consistently wrong, we still have those trends, which are still telling us something. As he says here, Watling talked at length of the problems of Ukrainian personnel training, and he may well be correct on that issue, but the war is about much more than trained personnel numbers. And perhaps the less said about the Russian pre-combat training programs, the better. I think it's a really good point, and it's great that he's done some analysis of that to show that there has been this change throughout this month, particularly where we saw consistent heavy losses of, or fairly heavy losses of Russian tanks, and then that has dropped off and become erratic. And I just think the Russians are struggling to find enough tanks to use effectively on the front lines. I'm just going to... Now, this dovetails precisely with what I was saying earlier, actually, and that was just stream. I love it when things knit together. So, talking about how difficult it is to do things against this proliferation of FPV drones, Andrew Perpetuous talked about this road in his live stream where they are either destroyed on the way into, so the Russian supplies or whatever, or new troops or rotations, or whatever, these vehicles driving along this road or these roads to the Russian positions are destroyed either on the way in or on the way out. And this road is under fire control, but a different kind of fire control.
That kind of drone fire control, it's kind of a new thing, I guess. I'm not sure any war has ever had drone fire control before, but once it's established, it's really hard to get rid of, because like established drone teams are difficult to deal with. You'd imagine if you're really truly established, you're probably setting up some sort of counter drone electronic warfare equipment to protect yourself from enemy drones. You of course control all of the roads and paths, and with drones, you control the vehicles and the infantry. So it's just tough once you get under that kind of fire control.
And it's such a good point here. So where you traditionally would have artillery fire control with maybe 3 artillery pieces 15, 20 kilometers away, and a mortar crew maybe 4 kilometers away, hammering a road, this road or set of roads here, that is easier to deal with, as in, okay, counter battery fire on those guys, let's hit those 3 artillery pieces and take out that mortar team. Okay, we can do that. But when it comes to drone fire control, then finding out where those drone teams are, and when there are multiple drone teams and they're operating anywhere, it's just so difficult to deal with. And better than that for the Ukrainians in this position, but I'm sure it might be switched in other places, is that this fire control has basically got a 100% success rate. So with fire control with artillery, you are, and like I say, this Max Pro video, 4-minute video of a Max Pro mine-resistant ambush protection vehicle driving into Chazy Vyar and getting these artillery shells hitting, but not hitting the vehicle, just exploding nearby. Because if you are the reconnaissance drone, you're feeding back info saying, okay, right, it's driving about this quickly, so you need to fire 30 seconds time. It's going to be about there. Quick fire at this coordinate now, and we might hit it in 30 seconds time. It's very difficult to coordinate all those different teams firing on that one vehicle that's driving pretty quickly through the along these roads, and you don't know whether it's going to turn off, do this, do whatever. So there's a lot of guesswork. It's running the gauntlet. You're running the gauntlet with that vehicle, and you may or may not get hit, but there's kind of a low probability of hitting that vehicle. With FPV drones, you've got basically 100% probability. But even if it's got electronic warfare on top of the vehicle, they don't always work. And often the video with Darwin and his drone activities that was really interesting that I referenced a couple of weeks back was saying that that one got taken down by EW, then get another one up, and basically you eventually grind down the electronic warfare, or you find a hole in it until you do hit that vehicle, or you change the frequencies or whatever it is. Now, in this case, yeah, Andrew was saying before I started playing it that the vehicles are basically all getting taken out, coming in or out of that place. And so the vehicles you are following, most vehicles won't have anti-drone warfare, electronic warfare components on board. So you are following this vehicle and you're going to pretty much take it out. And that's that. And so supplying these units or doing any kind of rotation or giving them any assistance becomes exceptionally difficult under drone fire control of roads. It is even more effective than artillery fire control, and I think that's a really interesting observation there. So moving on, we have bad news for the Ukrainians, and this again, it's these medium range reconnaissance drones that are picking up these high level targets. This is Odessa, S-300, a TEL transporter erector launcher, and he actually corrects himself, and a radar. It's a 5N63 folded antenna radar taken out. And again, I mean, Ukrainians do not want to lose S-300s. These are decent enough air defense systems that are really important components of the whole network that they have. Yes, great. They of course they need Patriots, or even better, but S-300s are still really important for getting coverage and being able to take out Russian aerial threats. On the other hand, here we have Jay and Kyiv talking about how things have changed, that we've got to the point where the Russians are not giving their soldiers any proper armor. Here we've got motorcycles with coffins attached to them, or artillery ammunition supply boxes or whatever attached as a sidecar. And this is how they are retrieving. This is how they're doing their medivacs. This is how they are providing supplies to the front line. And of course, FPV drones. If we're going to talk about that, fire control over a road, I'd much rather be in a BMP than riding on a motorcycle if I'm going to be hit with an FPV drone. So this is I guess a reflection of how much the Russians are struggling for proper mechanized equipment. Goes back to many of the things we've been saying previously. Right, going on to distance munitions, 10 out of 10 Shahed drones were hit, and that is a really good inception rate. And I think with each subsequent Shahed drone wave of drone attacks, I wonder whether you're getting less decent intel back. So at the beginning of the war, you're finding out holes in the air defense network, and you're also finding out where things like S-300s were. They were having to be shot down with expensive bits of kit, and that could be fed back to the Russians, and they could use that intel. Now, I think the Ukrainians have got such a wide network of low-tech mobile air defense teams with autocannons on the back of a truck or an SUV or Gepards. It's all very much more mobile. That these are the ones that are shooting down the large proportion of Shahed drones, and I don't think that will give the Russians so much decent information back concerning the air defense network coverage. I don't know, just a speculation for myself there. Now the big bit of news is this, and it's yet again a despicable Russian attack on civilian infrastructure. We have a Dnipro residential block being hit by a missile. I don't think this is an air defense sending a missile awry. I don't think this is electronic warfare. This looks to be, because we've got the missile slamming into it. We can see that on video, and it is not cool. This is either the Russians directly targeting a civilian building, or it's sending a missile in willy-nilly into Dnipro, and we don't really care what it hits. Those seem to be the most plausible explanations, and both of those are despicable. Here we have, somebody, imagine, as Tim White says, a young woman terrified by a missile strike nearby. Imagine this is you, or your sister, or your daughter, as one of Russia's missiles smashes into the building across the road. And even more so, I mean, I'm going to play you this just to give you a sense of distress that this woman has, because we need to remember what it means for a missile to hit a building. We need to remember. I mean, you can read the subtitles yourself. I won't speak over it, but just it gives you a sense of the terror that these attacks bring on ordinary everyday people.
Мы вышли в коридор, потом бабах! Просто дверь упала, запах пошел, гарри, вот, пыль пошла, я упала на пол, меня пытались поднять, мне было страшно, я плакала. Мне было страшно. Меня подняли, начали кричать, бабушка говорит, вызывай кого-то, мама кому-то звонила, я не помню уже все, мне страшно, я не знаю, и я не знаю, где спать. Мне страшно, что я не вернусь домой, то, что я не посплю в своей кровати. Я не знаю, что мне делать.
We have become desensitized, I think, to the continued attacks on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. In my opinion, this picture that you're looking at now should be front page of every freaking newspaper that you can pick up from the stands. This should be alongside the headline, Russia did this and continues to do this. What are we doing about it? You know, there was, it was either her or someone else was explaining how, you know, they were just standing there and then suddenly everything just fell in front of them. You know, the building collapsed as you're like standing in your own, I don't know, corridor or wherever, or in your bathroom, and then suddenly poof, the wall's not there and half the building's collapsed in front of you. Just, it's horrific. And yeah, we've got, one person's died, 12 are injured, including one child. 5 people are still missing, though. So the death toll is likely much higher. And here we have the trajectory of the missile. I mean, I'm not too knowledgeable on these things, but it looks fairly much like a missile in terminal phase. Just slamming into a building. Just horrific stuff that the Russians continue to do on a daily basis. And we must not forget this. And that's why I wanted to show you the distress of that girl, because this is happening every day still, every day. I mean, there's Andrew Perpetua lists some of the things that take place that we don't hear about. I don't report to you, but the daily Tourette's is getting hammered, or in the Liman direction, and here and Chaziv Yar and all these places, Karakova, getting hammered with Russian ordnance. Right, on the other hand, a Russian electronics factory has been hit by drones. The Kremny L silicon plant in Karachev was attacked. That's 40 kilometers east of Bryansk, so not too far over the border into Russia in the north. Astra says the roof of the production building, which creates components for army use, was damaged, as was a military warehouse nearby. Then, from, what was it, I don't know, 5 days ago or whatever, the beach in Sevastopol had all of the, I don't know, shrapnel or whatever it was, submunitions, as the Russians claimed from an ATACMS, raining down on them. Of course, there were not nearly enough submunitions for that to be an ATACMS, so then people claiming it was a Russian air defense missile, and there were parts of that were identified as Russian Tor-1 missile. So here we have Russian military guys lamenting that they shot down an ATACMS missile or missiles directly over a crowded beach, killing many people. So now we have Russians on Telegram channels actually admitting that it was their air defense what did it. So the narratives put out by the Russian MOD were just simply not correct. Then we had the claim about the S-500 yesterday. Some people claiming it was shot in or taken out in Luhansk, but it seems to be Crimea, Jankoy, more exactly. Newest Russian S-500 intercepts literally ATACMS cluster missiles. So the Tvaz artillery said the ATACMS cassette, so cluster warhead, has arrived in Ebal radar from the S-500, and it's possibly the 76T6 or 77T6 anti-ballistic missile engagement, active phased array radar used for tracking high-speed ballistic targets like the ATACMS. So it's supposed to be taking out the ATACMS, gets taken out by the ATACMS. Crimean Wind and other Ukrainian sources are reporting the possible destruction of the new Russian S-500 Prometheus air defense system near the Jankoy airfield in occupied Crimea. NASA firms thermal imagery shows a fire at the presumed location of the missile attack, which was acquired at 1 o'clock Kiev time in the afternoon. And that's firms data showing destruction of something. Now, it might not be the S500, who knows, but it's a pretty good location for it. Jankoy has the airbase, military airbase. It's a rail and road logistics hub. It's got depots all around. This is exactly where you would want a S500, either around there or around Sevastopol, I would argue, if you're going to take it to Crimea at all. Also talk about the, and this happened sort of 24th, so 5 days ago, the space tracking comm center that was targeted by the Ukrainians in Crimea. There's now satellite imagery to show there is at least some damage to that. Unsure with the poor resolution imagery as to how much damage there was. Someone here is saying actually it doesn't look like there's too much infrastructure hit, but it's pretty difficult to say. It certainly, there was a hit there. Back on the 24th. Right, on to other bits and pieces. Ukraine has returned 10 more people from Russian captivity, according to Zelensky. These aren't prisoners, though, that have just been taken during the war. Some of these are older prisoners. So from 2021, we've got deputy head of Medjis of the Crimean Tatar people. We've had someone in captivity since 2017, 2018, so on and so forth. So, yeah, 10 people returned. There has been an uptick in prisoner swaps because there were no prisoner swaps after the Il-76 cargo plane was hit, and the Russians claimed it was full of Ukrainian prisoners, but it wasn't. And then there were no prisoner swaps for ages, and now there have been some fairly significant ones. This is a smaller one, but I don't know. It could have been some particular people swapped on each side. Now, it's a great story and so typical. So the context is that anyone who's against Russia is by default a Nazi. Doesn't matter who you are and what you believe, you're just going to be a Nazi. And that is because their whole framework of understanding good and bad is the Soviet army in the 1940s against the fascistic Nazis of Germany. And that's how every other conflict is kind of understood, and every tete-a-tete with any other human being is like, you're bad, therefore you're a Nazi. And of course, this is rendered nonsensical by the fact that their own administration has gone in a completely fascistic, ultra-nationalistic direction. And these days, you're much more likely to see a connection between the present Putin administration and that of National Socialism in the 1930s and 40s in Germany. I love this story of a Russian writer, says Tim White, who won a diploma at a Russian patriotic poetry competition. Over 100 Russian MPs subscribed to his social media account, except Gennady Rakitin, doesn't exist. He's an anti-war campaigner, invented him and translated 1930s Nazi poetry. So, wow, Ilya Ponomarenko puts a bit more meat on the bones here. Anti-war internet activists created a fake personality of a Russian patriotic poet who posted his war poetry about Russian blood and Russian soil on social media, and the newly discovered Z talent became quite popular with the widely shared among Russian members of parliament, war propagandists, and Putin bootlicking celebrities. But in reality, all of those Z poems were translations of propagandistic rhymes from Nazi Germany. Pieces that praised the Z genius of Vladimir Putin in this war on Ukraine were originally dedicated to Adolf Hitler, and they loved that. Nazi-era poetry comes naturally with what Putin's Russia has turned into, and that's kind of what I was saying. Fascinating stuff, and egg on your face there as who are the Nazis? You guys. And then finally, although this is not Russia, this is China, this kind of thing is what we've seen with Russia more generally. Basically how a lot of your Twitter feed gets populated, says Chris Owicki, and this is absolutely true. And this is a real challenge for us going forward. I was speaking to my friend last night about disinformation and information. He was saying that, well, Twitter that has all of these bots and trolls. So bots, as you can see here, computers connected to a whole series of phones that each have individual profiles on them. And then you can send out to all those profiles the command to like a certain post, or you can copy and paste some content to put on each of those profiles is why you often see exactly the same worded comments from multiple posts and profiles. This happened. This happened after Brexit 2016. I saw there's some incredible images of each individual posts taken from all the like hundreds of different accounts, and they all say exactly the same thing. You see images of that. But anyway, so this has been going on for some time. But this is how we are being manipulated. It's that battlefront in the information spaces. But I was speaking to my mate last night who said that the business model of Twitter is not sustainable. It's like it's broken. It's going to go down type thing. And I was like, don't be so sure, mate, because my view is that Twitter is part of Elon Musk's overall business model. Or project, if you like. So you've got SpaceX and Tesla. There are these overlaps, and you have technology going between them, and raw materials for both. You can't come to the same place. So I think he sees everything as part of his business empire. And Twitter might be a loss leader, but it gains him an awful lot. So he's done a deal supposedly with Trump where he gets to be the business advisor to Trump if Trump wins the election in November. And what he gives to Trump isn't necessarily campaign funding, but it's actually arguably more important than that. So he gives Trump a amplification of his message. He controls Twitter. It might not be making money, but it gives him the ability to advance messages for people who really want that. So Trump will, or Marjorie Taylor Greene. So what happens here is Marjorie Taylor Greene might say something really divisive, and in China they think, okay, that's divisive. We want US politics to become divided, and we want people to be eating at each other. And so we are going to get all of these hundreds of profiles are going to like Marjorie Taylor Greene's post straight away. And then she thinks, oh, look at this. I'm really popular. All the Americans think that this is all correct. In fact, 95% of the people who are liking her tweets don't even exist, right? And they are Chinese entities. But of course, that plays merry havoc with the sense of what the lay of the land is in America. For example, that's just a kind of example, but you get my point. We are consistently fighting against trolls and bots, and when you add AI into that, artificial intelligence that could create content, is not even a troll. It's not someone sitting there typing and pretending to be someone else. These are AI profiles that can then be created at incredible pace. You can have all these different AI profiles creating all of this scare quotes original content. Is not original, it's kind of AI generated, but it is seemingly like these people are individuals more so than, say, these bot farms that will post the same thing that's given to them by a central computer. AI bots can just generate their own content. It's scary times in terms of how we can be manipulated. Anyway, that's enough from me. Thanks for watching. Take care. Speak soon. Toodle pips.